Here we go. Now we're on. All right. The book of Job is a very relevant book. This is for my son Ian, and he had asked for a study on it, and I had 10 years of sermons on video, and they all got erased. So we'll start this one on the book of Job. The book of Job is called the greatest work of poetry by those that don't believe the Bible, that aren't Christian, that aren't religious. For instance, your great professors and what they would call exemplary divines. Those are the men from which and women from which what are called higher critics appeared. Now, higher critic sounds like a good term. To them, it is, but it's not. Because a higher critic, for instance, would be like a professor teaching on the Bible at Yale and Harvard. I watch all their lectures. I've got 39 formal years of college and much more studying besides that. Um, one of my degrees is in etiology, another in historical, what we call biblical archaeology, historical archaeology. I've studied quite a few fields. But see, I believe the Bible and I take it real. Now, what's interesting is these professors will point out all the things that have been proven, but they still will tell you why they don't believe it. So that's called a higher critic. And so where did it begin? It began in Oxford in the early 1600s. And these men did not even read the Bible. They didn't think it was worth their time. So they would study Plato, the writings of, the Iliad, Ulysses, what they would call great narratives. They would, if they could, and they could if they had the money, paid somebody to tutor them in languages, they could go to Egypt at that time period. This is when exploration was just beginning. Later on, it would develop, and out of Oxford would come Cambridge, which is the true school of higher critics in the early 1800s, late 1700s. And why am I telling you all this? Because these men don't believe the Bible, and they'll always tell you why it's not right. But one of the things they can't do is dispute the way it's written. And the book of Job is called by anybody that is a literary or classic novel graduate or higher degree, PhD or THD. Everyone agrees, and they have. Everyone throughout time says it is the greatest book of poetry ever written. It surpasses anything they say ever put out by a human hand. And as a result, the book of Job is, well, it's given to us by God, and it allows us to relate in ways that most people wouldn't understand. You say, what do you mean? Well, you don't have to plow very far in the field of Job to realize that trauma, tragedy is a life experience. And these higher critics find in the book of Job the greater trauma. They find the greater version of man and his ultimate sufferings and then overcoming at the end. But what they do is they don't believe. They believe it's fiction. But here is the truth. The book of Job is the oldest book of the Bible. When it says Job lived in Ur, and we're going to get into that. Ur means wooded. At this time, it wasn't a desert. It was a fruitful. It was like they called it the cradle of life. It was up in the valley of Shinar. Ur was in the northern part. You're going to find this is where the oldest texts come from. The Ugaritic tablets are going to be found down in the southern region there. The oldest writings are going to be found there. The entire clay librum was found at Ur of the Chaldees, just right there south. But in a desert now. But at one time, it was very lush. So why is this important? Well, this is important because to understand the mind of Job, you have to understand the social implications. And social implications are these. What is the structure there? What is the culture there? What is it that people do for relaxation? What do they do for work? What do they do for ethics? What is controlling their lives and their lifestyles? You see, So this is one of the things that we need to understand. Also, look at Job's name. Most people don't understand what Job's name means. It's almost like a moniker. If you have a Strong's, you'll say, "Oh, I looked it up and it means hated." Well, that's not really correct. Most people use a Strong's, and when I was a pastor, I would always give every member their own Strong's concordance, and I'd encourage them to use it. I had one member, my mother even, but I had members wear them things out, and I'd have to give them another one because I would encourage them to look up every word, and that's why I had a church full of Bible scholars. So Job's name means this. It means the one who is disliked and hated by those around him. Now, why would that be? Because Babylon is going to come from Ur of the Chaldees. It is also going to come. Nimrod is the one that started Babylon. Nimrod also started Egypt. And Nimrod also built the Tower of the Babylonians, which you can go on YouTube and see. It was never lost. But the proprietors, when England began conquering the world, one of the things they did, them and the Nazis and others, was to gather up artifacts and make it so people wouldn't see that the true God was real. So that's why you're going to see this wrought fence all the way around it. But interestingly enough, the carving on the side, which is ancient, you know, 4000 BC era, has the dialects, the 10 proper dialects from which all roots and languages arise. Most people think there's just 3 or 5 primary, but when you get down to it, there's 10, and then they subroot and categorize out. So the book of Job is the oldest book in the Bible. Job was alive during the days of Shem. You say, what do you mean? Shem, Ham, and Japheth, they got off the ark, remember? He was alive during the days of Nimrod, the building of the Tower of Babel. He would have been alive during this time period. Why is it important? Because let me tell you something, Job would be hated. Babylon means the gateway by which Baal will be revealed to the world. Egypt means the god of death, and those that serve him willingly separate from the god of life. It's called the land of the Copts, Copts, Coptys, and it means those who are willingly dead. Now, there are 2 types of people that were found in Egypt. Those that were Egyptian, willingly dead and separated from the God of life, and those that were dying. It also means dire straits, like Scylla and Charybdis, which means in order to leave Egypt, you have to walk a straight path. Interesting how all these things make sense when you understand the historical grammatical background, along with the sociological norms and customs that would be found amongst the ancient patriarchs, Job being the oldest. It will be the faith of Job that will inspire and bring, I believe, to Abram at that time. God will touch Abram. Well, don't you know Abram would have known about Job, even though Abram was coming later? His father would definitely have known about Job. And the wisdom of Job is unbelievable. The tenacity, the devotion that Job has is unbelievable. Friends, those that don't like the Bible have to bow before the truth that Job is the greatest poetical book ever written. If you could read it in the Hebrew, it would blow your mind. That's why I'm going to break it down for you from the Hebrew. It is a book of truth. It is a book of relativity. It is a book of spiritual warfare. Whether you believe it or not, most people don't realize you are locked into spiritual battle. You see, you are either worshiping at the feet of the god of Babylon. Do you remember Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego? We're going to be talking 3,000 years, 3,300 years later. Interesting that it's 3,300 years later, circa, that a man by the name of Nebuchadnezzar is going to have a statue of himself built and say, if you don't bow before my statue, you're going to go into that fiery furnace. And now the fourth chapter, of course, is written in Chaldean. That means Nebuchadnezzar wrote it in his own language. But in the Hebrew, which at this time is an ancient Hebrew, it's exilic Hebrew, which means it's Aramaic. It's evolving into Aramaic. But what he literally says is, why do you hate and always go against us? Why are you challenging me and my people? You see, Job's name means literally that. The one who does not get along with the people. He's not a contritist. A matter of fact, Job's going to say later on, there's not a widow or orphan. There's probably about 300,000 people in that city at this time period. It was the cradle of life. It was massively, it had one of the largest libraries ever found. Massive library. And they still haven't examined most of those. They say they haven't. They locked them up. Now, here's the deal. When we get to the book of Job, we're going to see that he lived the life of a true believer, a true Christian. He trusted in the Messiah like people today should. He had the faith of an apostle thousands of years before they would be born, before the first advent of our Christ, our Lord Jesus, which was just celebrated this last December 25th. By the way, most of you should know that Jesus would have been born between September 12th and 19th. He would have been in Egypt, or on his way to Egypt. It would have been about a 1 to 2 year caravan, and that's why he slew everybody 2 years and below. He was trying to intercept them and kill them, but he didn't get it. So here's the deal. The time and the customs of the book of Job was this. It was a great amount of heathen. You understand, out of Ham, the dark one, and then Canaan, the cursed one, is going to come forth the progenitor, or the one who would create Babylon. But first, he's going to break down and settle Ur of the Chaldees. So, this is a fine place to break off. Lecture 1. We will get into the book of Job, chapter 1, verse 1 in the next one. If you have any questions or comments, post them, and I will go ahead and try to answer them before we get into the next one. All right. Have a great day and continue your studies.